Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. The cheap vampire fangs in Josh's mouth were loose again. He kept pushing them in with his thumb while he looked over the porch railing at the crowd. Emma tugged at my sleeve and held up her pumpkin bucket. She wanted to go. The street smelled like leaves and wood smoke. Houses had string lights and plastic bones on the lawns. Dogs barked behind fences. It felt normal in that steady early evening way that only happens on Halloween. I checked the time on my phone. It was a few minutes past 6 o'clock. I told Josh and Emma to stick close and to hold hands at every crossing. My rule was simple. If I say stop, you stop. No debate. Josh rolled his eyes and said he got it. Emma nodded hard enough to move her headband. She was a little witch. He was a vampire with a cape I had cut shorter, so it would not trip him up. I told them both I loved their costumes, and that we would make it to the block party if the streets looked clear. Josh said he wanted to see the big skeleton on Maple. I told him we would pass it on the way back if the line was not too long. He accepted that and pressed the fangs in again. We stepped off our porch and joined the slow shuffle of parents and kids. The neighbor 2 doors down had a fire pit on his driveway. Marshmallows on skewers sat in an aluminum tray. He waved and held up a bag of candy. We moved on with the group. Emma practiced her trick-or-treat line to the air, as if someone might grade her. I kept scanning. Habit. Jobs that taught me to look at doorways and hands left me that way. Nothing special yet, just a habit that stayed. The first block had a house with a fake cemetery full of foam headstones and a motion sensor skeleton that screeched when someone passed. Parents laughed. Phones were out. Kids ran up and down the steps. I made sure Josh and Emma climbed one stair at a time. Emma sounded out the names on the fake headstones and told Josh that one said Sam. It did not. He said it did. She giggled, and the two of them moved along the path in a small circle around me, the way they always did in crowds. Josh on my left, Emma on my right, my hands free to reach both. There were more sirens than usual, far off, not in the neighborhood, but in the city past the hills. A helicopter thumped somewhere to the south and then moved off. I could not see it. I set it aside. Halloween always came with parades and drunk drivers and dumb stunts. Sirens come with it. No need to put weight on Josh and Emma for that. Josh tried to read a yard sign in a spooky font. He gave up and started counting pumpkins instead. Emma waved at a girl in a fairy dress and the girl waved back. I tapped my pocket to confirm I had the flashlight and the small multi-tool and the adhesive strips I carry for scrapes. Everything was there. I breathed out and kept walking. At the corner, a group had set up a folding table with cider cups and a speaker on the grass. A man in a foam zombie head handed out glow sticks. The head turned toward me with the fixed smile of the mask and he held out 2. I said thank you and took them. His hand shook a little. Maybe the mask was hot. He stepped back and stumbled over an extension cord and almost fell. The woman next to him laughed and said something about cheap costumes. He stood up, steadied himself, and lifted his hand as if to wave it off. It was a small thing. I watched him a second longer than was polite and then moved on. I handed the glow sticks to Josh and Emma. Emma cracked hers and watched the light bloom. Josh saved his. He said he would use it when it got dark. At the third house we visited, a plastic spider dropped from the eave when Josh rang the bell. He pretended not to jump. Emma did not pretend. The door opened and a man in full face paint crouched to Emma's level and held out a bowl. He stayed crouched as 3 more kids climbed the steps. His head tilted to one side and stayed there too long. The other adults decided it was performance. I felt heat behind my eyes and told Josh and Emma to say thank you and come down. The man stayed crouched as the next group came up. A woman asked if he was okay. He made a wet noise in his throat. A young boy reached for a second handful. The man's hand shot forward and closed on the boy's wrist. Everyone froze. The boy's father lunged and smacked the painted hand away. The man fell backward into his entryway, arms bent under him in a bad angle. Then he rolled and came forward again, on hands and knees, mouth open. The father pushed the boy behind him and told someone to get inside the house. The mother grabbed the boy and pulled. I grabbed Josh and Emma by their collars and told them to back down the steps. The crouched man scrambled forward and his teeth snapped at air. The father kicked him in the chest. The painted head rocked back. A woman in a witch hat laughed in a choked way and said it was not funny anymore. The man crawled again. The father kicked again. 2 kicks. 3. Then the house door slammed shut from inside, with the crouched man still out on the porch. The deadbolt clicked. The man in paint pushed up to his feet. His jaw hung to one side, where paint had cracked and skin had torn. He stepped forward. The father grabbed his son and started to back down. Another adult tried to help. Voices rose. It spread across the stairs and the sidewalk. Kids started crying. Someone called out for an ambulance. We moved. I pulled Josh and Emma down and told them we needed to skip the next few houses. Emma kept looking over her shoulder and asking what happened to that man. I said I did not know. Josh tried to get ahead of us, then slowed when I said his name. People were still moving house to house. Laughter mixed with an edge that had not been there half an hour ago. The glow stick man at the corner had taken off his foam head. He leaned hard on the table with both hands and breathed through his mouth. The woman with him rubbed his back with her palm in a circle. He looked up with cloudy eyes and then down again. I picked up the pace and set our path toward home. At the end of the block, we ran into Mr. Walsh and his teenager, who wore a werewolf hoodie. Mr. Walsh had a small radio clipped to his pocket. He always brought it out for storms. He said the main road behind the church was a mess. Another neighbor said there was a Halloween parade downtown that had a pileup. Someone else said a bad flu was going around the college. None of it fit what I had seen on the porch 2 streets back. I told Mr. Walsh that we were heading toward our house, and he nodded and told us to keep the porch light off when we got there. He was not smiling. The teenager growled for effect, the way a teenager does when trying to be funny. The growl cut off when a distant scream carried over the yards. The teen pulled his hood back and stood very still. I told Josh and Emma we were turning early and they both said okay without argument. That told me everything I needed about the sound we had just heard. We cut through the alley that ran behind our street. I kept the kids on the grass because gravel crunch travels far. A dog hit a fence with its paws and barked hard. I put my hand on Emma's shoulder to keep her from running. She watched the dog and then looked at me to read me. I kept my voice even and told her it was fine. The back gate to our yard sagged on one hinge. I had meant to fix it. I pushed it open and closed it behind us. We walked up our back steps. I told Josh and Emma to wait on the top step and I went in first. I kept my hand on the knob in case I needed to pull the door shut fast. The house held that stale smell that sits in the air after you have been out all day. I flicked on the kitchen light. It came on, and then stuttered once and stayed on. I looked through the kitchen to the living room and front door. No movement. I set the kids at the table and got 2 plastic cups of water. I told them to keep their costumes on for now, and not to take off their shoes. I filled the kettle and put it on the stove out of habit and then turned it off. Tea did not matter. I locked the back door, then checked the windows. I turned on the television. The local station showed a band playing at the parade. People in the crowd had their hands up. It looked normal. The sound cut and the screen flicked to a test pattern. A text scroll came up with a county emergency message. It was the same old message from storms. It told us to stay off the roads and keep the lines clear for emergency services. No details. I switched channels. One national anchor was speaking into a phone while looking off camera. His voice had that careful calm that means nothing is calm. I pulled 2 backpacks from the hall closet and set them on the table. Josh and Emma watched. I loaded one with water bottles, peanut butter, a jar of jelly, a loaf of bread, a can opener, a roll of duct tape, a small first aid kit, 2 flashlights, fresh batteries, a box cutter and a lighter. The other bag got 2 blankets, a spare pair of shoes for each kid, socks, 2 knuckle lights, a small radio, scissors, a roll of trash bags, and a spare phone charger with a battery pack that might hold 1 charge. Emma asked if we were going on a trip. I said yes, a short one. I told her to bring her favorite small thing that fit in her pocket and nothing else. She picked a rubber ring with a cat face. Josh asked if we were going to Grandma's house. Grandma was across town on the other side of the river. I said we were staying home for now and might go to a friend's place later. He nodded and then flinched when a siren screamed very close and then cut out. He held his glow stick and looked at me for a call. I did not give one, not yet. In the closet next to the backpacks above the coats was a small lockbox. I took it down and set it on the counter. I spun the dial and opened it. Inside was an old revolver from my father's house and a box of ammunition. It was not a fancy gun. It worked. I checked the cylinder. Empty. I loaded 6 rounds and closed it. I set the box next to it, and then took both to the pantry and put them on the top shelf behind the cereal. Josh watched me do it. He did not say anything. He knew better than to point or ask a loud question that would make Emma nervous. He had that part of me in him, the part that keeps quiet while noting exits and details. I touched his shoulder. He nodded once. The doorbell rang. Once, quick, then 3 times in a rush. Josh and Emma looked at me. I shook my head and put my finger to my lips. The Porch camera was a cheap model that put a video on my phone only when it felt like it. I walked to the front door and stood to the side. I asked who it was. A woman's voice said it was Kayla from next door. She asked to come in because her husband was sick and she needed help. I cracked the door chain and looked. It was Kayla. Her cheeks were wet. Her hands were clean. No blood. She saw my eyes and held out her hands the way a person does to show no weapon. Her hands shook. She said again that her husband was sick. She did not say he was bitten. She did not look back at her house. Her porch light was on. Josh and Emma were behind me at the end of the hall. I told her to wait 1 minute on her porch and I would come out with a flashlight. I stepped onto my porch and pulled the door shut behind me. I did not lock it. I had the revolver in my jacket pocket, but my hand was not on it. I asked where her husband was. She said he was in the kitchen on the floor. I asked what happened. She said he fell and hit his head, and then started trying to get up and then fell again. I asked if he was bleeding. She said his mouth had blood on it from falling. Her hands kept curling and uncurling. I told her to stay there and I would check. She grabbed my sleeve and said not to leave her outside. I told her I would be 2 minutes and that I would come back. She let go. I crossed to her porch and stepped inside her front door. The smell inside was sour, not rot, more like milk that had spilled and sat. The living room had a bowl of candy on the coffee table and a show paused on the television. I moved through it to the kitchen and stayed to the wall. A man lay on the tile near the fridge. He was on his side. His arm was under him. Blood smeared under his cheek from a cut on his lip. His eyes were open but unfocused. He pushed his knees under him and then slid down. His heels scraped on tile. He tried again. He did not see me. He did not call out. His fingers dug at the grout lines. There were small red dots near the baseboard that had sprayed and then dried. I stepped back to the door and called out to Kayla to stay on her porch. She did not answer. I checked the man again. He rolled toward me. His jaw worked in a slow grind. His eyes did not track. He pushed up again. His arm bent at a wrong angle. No sound came out except air and a wet mouth noise. If he had been bitten, I could not see it through the shirt and pants. If this was not a bite but something else, I had no time to figure it out. I went back to the porch and found Kayla standing half in my yard and half on her steps. She had moved. She asked if he was alive. I said yes. She grabbed at my jacket again and asked me to help her carry him to the couch. I told her we should not touch him. I told her to go inside, grab her car keys, and get her purse and a jacket. She shook her head and said she would not leave him. I told her she did not have to leave him. I said we would call for help and I would meet an ambulance at the street. I lied. No ambulance was coming. She looked over my shoulder at Josh and Emma through the glass and saw Emma. Something in her expression changed. She pulled back and hugged herself. She asked if she could sit on my steps for a minute. I nodded and said yes. I stepped inside my own house and locked the door. I told Josh and Emma to go to the hallway and put on their coats. Emma asked if Kayla was okay. I said I did not know. The television blinked and went black. The house clicked and hummed in that way that means the power is not sure if it wants to stay on. It came back. The emergency message returned. The crawl said a shelter would be opened at the middle school gym. It said to avoid hospitals if possible due to capacity. It said nothing about bites. It said nothing about the word that wanted to form. I did not say that word. I did not want Josh or Emma to repeat it. A crash hit the side of the house. The sound came from Kayla's porch. I ran to the window and pulled the blind down with 2 fingers to make a gap. Kayla had her hands up. Her husband had made it to his feet and was on the porch. His jaw moved in that same off-center grind. He was in his socks. He stepped toward her as if pulled. She moved left. He adjusted. She moved right. He adjusted. She spoke his name until the sound broke. He did not answer. He reached with both arms. She backed into the railing and turned to climb over and caught her foot. She fell into the shrubs and rolled into my yard. He leaned over the rail and hung there for a second with his mouth open. Teeth clicked together. Then he toppled the rest of the way down and landed on his knees and palms. Kayla crab walked backward. He crawled with elbows and knees. The motion had a steady rhythm. He closed the distance. She pushed her heels into the sod and did not gain ground. I took the revolver from the pantry and stepped out on my porch. Josh and Emma stood at the end of the hall. I said their names and told them to go to the bathroom and close the door. I kept my eyes on Kayla's yard in case the husband turned my way. Kayla shouted my name once. Her voice cracked and then faded. I raised the revolver and aimed low at the man's body. I did not want to stray round in a bad direction. The shot cracked and burned the air. The man lurched and fell to his side. He pushed back to his knees. I fired again. He lurched and kept moving. I adjusted, put the front sight on his face, held a breath out, and pulled the trigger. The third shot dropped him flat. Kayla went silent and stared. I backed to my door without looking away. I told Kayla to come inside my house. She did not move. She looked down at her husband. I told her again. She nodded too slowly, stood, and stumbled to the steps. I pulled her inside and locked the door. Emma cried in the bathroom. Josh tried to talk through the door to her, steady and quiet. He used her name, and it helped. We sat Kayla on a dining chair. Her eyes kept drifting to the door. I got her a glass of water and set it in both of her hands. She said thank you without moving her lips. I told her to keep her hands on the glass so they would stop shaking. She nodded. That did not stop much. I picked up the revolver and opened the cylinder. 3 rounds left. I put 3 more from the box into my pocket. The television lost the picture and went black again, then showed a slide that said to stand by. The room hummed as the fridge cycled down. The lights dimmed and held. I listened for the neighborhood. The sounds had changed. Less laughter, more unknowns. I told Josh and Emma to come out. They came down the hall. Emma looked at Kayla first, not at me. She asked where Mr. Fisher was. I said he would not be coming over. Kayla pulled her attention away from the front door and looked at Emma and started crying, in a sound that had no breath under it. Emma held out her cat ring with both hands, as if it would fix something. Kayla did not take it. Josh took Emma's hand and squeezed it. I told both of them to put on their backpacks. Emma cried harder and said she did not want to go. I knelt straight down so my head was level with hers, and told her that being scared did not change what we had to do, and that sometimes grown-ups were scared too. I said I would not let go of her hand. I said the quiet part that only she and I could hear. I told her I would not leave her. Josh watched and nodded, and he repeated the rule on his own. If I say stop, he stops. We moved to the garage. My car sat in the single bay with boxes stacked tight to one side. I hit the button. The door rose slow. Cold air slid under it. I killed the house lights and left the garage light off. Outside, porch lights went out in uneven lines, as if the power grid was leaning on weak legs. The street had a new sound now. Not voices, not laughter. Shoes on pavement that did not pick up and set down. Drags and taps. Something heavy knocked over 2 houses down and did not get picked up again. I put the kids in the back seat and told them to keep their heads down. Kayla stood behind my bumper and hugged herself. She looked back at her yard, and then down at the garage floor, and said she could not leave him. I told her not to go back. She did not move. She looked at the street instead and saw shapes moving. That decided it. She got in the front seat without speaking. We rolled out. I kept the headlights off until the last second, and then clicked them on low. The windshield showed a scatter of leaves. Farther out, shapes more solid than leaves crossed the beam, and then were gone. I turned right and crept past the orange glow from the neighbor's empty fire pit. I took the long way around to avoid the main road. Josh and Emma kept quiet. Kayla whispered the same short prayer twice and then stopped saying anything. At the end of our street, a pickup truck sat in the intersection with the driver door open. The front grille was dented, and the windshield had a starburst on the passenger side. A trick-or-treat bag lay in the road with its handle ripped. Candy had spilled and flattened. No one stood near the truck. Someone lay behind it, half under the bumper, arms out to the sides. I put the car in reverse, and then realized another set of headlights had come up behind us, and stopped. For a second I thought the driver would pull around and move past. The driver door opened. A man in a hoodie stepped out with a bat. He walked toward my door and shielded his eyes from my brake lights with the back of his wrist. He left his driver door open and the dome light on. 2 small forms were in the back seat. They were children. The dome light showed pale faces and still hands. They watched their father approach my car. I cracked my window and told the man to stay with his kids and back his car up so we both could turn around. He shook his head and said the road was blocked both ways and he needed me to move the truck. He said it again louder. He came up to my window and raised the bat in a quick motion. I held up my palm and asked him to slow down. He hit the roof of my car. The metal thudded. Emma yelped and covered her ears. The man stepped to the side and swung at my side mirror. Plastic snapped. He raised the bat again. I opened the door fast and caught him with it. He stumbled back and hit his hip on my rear quarter panel. He raised the bat with one hand and swung. The bat hit the door. Pain shot up my arm through my hand, where I had gripped the door edge. I stepped in close to take away his swing. We went chest to chest. He spit words, and I could not hear the meaning past the hiss. I shoved him back and he fell. The bat clanged on the pavement. He reached for it and I kicked it under my car. He stared at me, and then at his kids, and then at the night. He started crying and said he was sorry. I grabbed his elbow and pulled him up and told him to get his kids out of the car and follow me on foot. He nodded hard. He wiped his face with his sleeve and hurried to his car. Before he could open the rear door of his car, 2 figures came around the far side of the truck in the intersection. Their heads moved in small jerks. One had a foam skull mask. The other was a man in a hooded sweatshirt stained on the front, missing one shoe. The man reached for the pickup truck door frame with both hands as if to steady himself. He did not steady. He launched forward in an ugly stumble. The masked one followed. The father froze with his hand on his car door. He looked at my car. He looked at me. I shook my head and pointed down the side street to our right. He put his body between the figures and his car door and yelled at the kids to lock the doors. The kids pressed their palms to the glass and stared past him at the figures. The skull mask turned our way. The father took 1 step back and then 2 steps forward. Then the skull mask moved quicker. The father yanked open the rear door and pulled at a stuck seatbelt. His fingers fumbled. His kids did not move. They stared past him and banged on the inside of the glass with open hands. I reversed hard, and the bat scraped loud as it dragged out from under my car. I swung the nose around the pickup truck and squeezed through the gap. Tires skidded on Candy. Kayla grabbed the handle above her door and said in a flat voice that I would crush a bag. I told her to look forward. The father shouted something that did not land as words. The skull mask and the hooded man reached him at the same time. I did not look again. I put the car into drive and threaded through 2 trash cans and bounced up onto the lawn of the house on the corner to get around a minivan that had been pushed sideways by something I did not want to picture. I gained the side street and killed the headlights again. We crept in the dark. I kept my eyes on the forward path. The mirror stayed dark under my hand. The main road near the supermarket sounded worse. Sirens on top of sirens. A deeper roar under it that was not engines. The car radio flicked from station to static. A recorded message cut in from the county again. It repeated the shelter location at the middle school. It told everyone to remain in place and not to seek hospitals. No mention of downtown now. No mention of the parade. The repeated message had a word I had never heard on a local broadcast. Quarantine. It sounded thin in this context. I decided we needed to leave the car and move on foot. I knew a path through backyards that led to the bike trail. From there we could make the middle school. If it was a trap, we would see it before we were in it. I pulled into a driveway one street over from ours where a for sale sign still had a bright flyer in the box. I nosed the car behind the side of the house so it would not be obvious from the street. I turned the car off and listened. Quiet, then a distant crash. No moving shapes nearby. I looked at Kayla. She had both hands locked around the door handle. I told her we needed to move now. She nodded, and then shook her head. She turned to stare at the front of her house down the street as if she could see it through the walls. I told her that if she stayed in the car, she might not get another chance. She unbuckled and got out without a word. Josh squeezed Emma's hand and said he had her. She nodded. We pulled backpacks on. I gave Kayla one of the flashlights and told her to keep it pointed at her own feet, unless I told her to raise it. I told Josh to keep a hand on Emma's backpack strap. I took Emma's hand. We moved with a steady pace, not running, not crawling. We cut between two houses and stepped over a low chain. Someone's backyard had a trampoline that shone black in the low light. A plastic cup lay on its surface. A man sat on the deck stairs with his chin on his chest. He had no costume. He wore a shirt with a college name. He lifted his head a little when we passed. We slowed. He said nothing. He did not stand. We did not approach him. We climbed the fence at the back. Josh went first and lowered himself down. I passed Emma to him, and then climbed. Kayla took too long with her foot in the chain links and started to panic. I told her to breathe out through her nose and then step down without looking at the ground. She did it. The bike trail was empty. Streetlights along it blinked in uneven patterns. One found us and made our shadows long and then dark again. I kept my mind on counts. 20 steps to the next pole, then 20 more. A shopping cart was overturned in the grass. Emma's backpack strap had twisted and was pinching her shoulder. I fixed it and told her to tell me if any part of her hurt. I asked Josh to count to 20 in a whisper to steady his breathing. He counted, and then kept counting without being asked. Counting kept his mouth busy and his mind away from the alley behind us. At the underpass near the creek, we met the first cluster of infected on foot in a tight space. 3 figures stood together near the pillar graffiti. One rocked from heel to toe in a small rhythm, and then leaned forward and shuffled 2 steps and stopped. Another had one arm limp at the shoulder. The third looked toward us with that empty, startled look that does not land on a face. Josh stopped counting. I squeezed Emma's hand, and lifted my other hand to tell Kayla to hold. The one with the limp arm turned toward the sound of the creek and then turned back toward us. I let go of Emma's hand long enough to pull the revolver. I waited to see if we could pass with distance. We moved to the far side of the path and hugged the wall. Our steps were clear in the tunnel. A pebble rolled and made an echo. The rocking one pivoted and raised its head. Its jaw worked. It took 1 step and brushed the pillar with its shoulder. Paint flaked. I put the front sight on the nearest head and waited. It took a second step. I fired once. The report slapped back from the concrete. It fell. The other 2 did not react the way living people react to gunfire. They rolled toward the source of the sound in a slow hunt. I fired again. The second fell. The third accelerated in a sudden burst and covered the last half of the space with a lunge. I fired and the round chipped the wall. The fast one reached me with an arm out. Its fingernails were broken down and filled with dirt. Its mouth snapped and a string of spit swung from lip to chin. I drove its head into the pillar again, then a second time, until it stopped moving. Kayla screamed and raised the flashlight beam straight into its eyes. It jerked at the light. I put the revolver to the forehead and fired. It went still. Emma cried without sound. Her shoulders moved fast. I put the revolver away and lifted her. She wrapped her legs around my waist and hid her face in my collar. Josh put his hand on my back between my shoulder blades in a quick pat and then let go. Kayla lowered the light and covered her mouth. She made a retching sound and held it down. I told all of them to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. I started walking with Emma still on my hip. After 10 steps, she slid down on her own and walked again. I said her name, and she answered. Clear. That mattered. The bike trail rose toward the old warehouses. Past the loading docks, a man stood in the middle of the asphalt with a traffic cone in hand. He wore a safety vest with reflective strips. He waved the cone at us. He shouted that we needed to get to the middle school. His voice cracked. Another person stood near him with a baseball cap pulled low. That one had a tool belt. The safety vest man said the road was clear that way. He pointed and then waved us on. Kayla moved toward him. I put my hand out and stopped her. The second person in the cap had a pipe in his belt, and his eyes tracked our backpacks. He moved his weight from heel to toe twice. The safety vest kept looking past us as if watching for a bigger group. I said to Kayla, quiet, that we were not walking into a path because a stranger waved a cone. She nodded. I turned us off the trail and up the low slope to the scrub behind the warehouses. The safety vest shouted that we were going the wrong way, and then called us names, and then called for us to stop. I did not turn back. He did not follow. We crossed a drainage ditch behind a chain-link fence. The fence had a section pulled down. We stepped over. A dog barked from somewhere off to our right with a fast, sharp pattern that meant it had a target. Then the bark stopped mid-sequence. We moved faster without running. Battery lights blinked in the dark up ahead, where the bike trail met the main road. 2 police cruisers were angled across the lanes with doors open. No officers in sight. Blood smeared in arcs on the driver door of one cruiser. A megaphone lay on the pavement. The message still came through the roof speaker. The battery had not died yet. It told everyone to go home, secure doors, wait for instructions. The words were sure and calm. The scene did not match the voice. I stepped around the megaphone. Emma stepped on the cord and almost tripped. I caught her elbow and we moved on. Josh kept his eyes forward and counted, low and steady. The middle school sat 2 blocks past the cruisers. Its windows glowed. A small crowd moved along the sidewalk toward the front doors. People carried backpacks and toddler carriers and folded strollers. Someone held a dog under one arm, with its legs straight out. It was quiet in a way that meant no one had the energy to waste on extra noise. A woman in a staff hoodie stood at the entrance and waved people in. She had a list on a clipboard and a pen behind her ear. A man in a yellow vest with a kitchen apron over it carried a box of bottled water from the cafeteria. He set it down and stood up slowly, his hand on his lower back. I did not see any uniforms, no police or emergency staff, just staff hoodies and parents with faces that did not know what to do next. I pushed Josh and Emma through the double doors and into the gym. The air smelled like rubber and floor varnish. A cluster of people sat on the bleachers in the corner. Kids clutched lawn chairs. Some slept with heads on backpacks. A teacher passed out blankets from a grey rolling bin. Kayla guided Emma up to a seat. A man near the bleachers had his shirt off, and a young woman dabbed a wet bandage at 2 half-moon cuts on his shoulder. He said a dog bit him. The cuts were close together and too wide for a small dog. The young woman pressed the bandage and looked at me while pressing, and I looked back at the man's face. He watched the door the whole time. He did not watch his own wound. He did not ask what she was putting on it. He did not ask to see it. He just watched the door and squeezed his hands into fists and let them go and squeezed them again. I shifted Josh and Emma to the far side of the gym. The revolver under my jacket felt heavy against my ribs. If anyone noticed the weight, no one said anything. The staff person with the clipboard stood on a chair and gave instructions. She said we were safe here. She said the doors were locked and custodians had closed the fire doors. She said the school had food in the cafeteria and water in the kitchen. She said if anyone was sick, we should raise a hand and a nurse would help. No one raised a hand. A man near a side door kept pulling his sleeve down to his wrist and then pushing it up and then looking at the back of his forearm. He stepped into the hallway and came back in. A boy near him stared at the man's sleeve. A voice spoke through the gym wall speaker and echoed once. It said the same emergency message we had heard in other places. It added a line about staying away from people who were violent. No one laughed at the word choice. Violent. It sounded thin. Kayla sat on the bleachers with Emma so Emma could lean her head on Kayla's shoulder. Josh walked the baseline and counted the blue lines on the floor. He was doing that thing he does when he feels the room closing in. He makes rules for lines and then follows them. I watched the 2 sets of doors that led to the lobby. The kitchen apron man came in with another box and took his time putting it down. He wiped his face with the back of his arm. He had a tattoo on his wrist of 2 initials. The young woman who had helped the bitten man came over to me and said the man called it a dog bite. but she had lived with dogs her whole life and that did not look like a dog bite. I told her to keep her voice down and to go tell the staff person with the clipboard. She said the staff person told her to fill out a form and wait for the nurse who had not arrived yet. She did not smile. She walked away to try someone else. A thump hit the glass in the lobby. A small scream answered from a mother. Another thump. The staff person waved her hands for quiet. She spoke in the classroom voice and told the room that everything was okay and that the locks were solid. A man in a jacket with a construction company logo went to the door to check the latch with his fingers. It held. He looked at the staff person and nodded. That helped. Another thump hit the glass and scraped down and left a smear. The kitchen apron man set his hands on his hips and stared at the glass. The staff person asked everyone to move up the bleachers and give the doors room. People lifted bags and kids and shuffled up. A child cried out for a lost stuffed animal and a stranger handed one up. Emma squeezed Kayla's sleeve. Kayla squeezed back. The man with the supposed dog bite stood. His face had a color that said fever. He rolled his shoulders as if to loosen them. The young woman who had helped him said something quiet to him. He did not answer her. He stood and then leaned forward too far and then caught himself with one hand on the bleacher bench. He looked at the door again. His jaw worked. The young woman put her hand on his forearm and he jerked it away. The small movement made the people nearest him flinch. He sat, stood, sat. His fingers curled in and out. The young woman looked at me again. She did not wave her arms or shout. She gave one small head shake. I understood. I moved my kids lower on the bleachers and told Kayla in a low voice to be ready to move to the far door if I told her to go. The gym doors swung open from the lobby and two men came in backward, pulling a third man by the arms. The third man flailed and snapped his mouth toward their hands. His face had blood on it that did not look fresh. The men pulling him wore janitor keys around their belts. One had a broom in his other hand and tried to wedge it between the snapping man's legs to trip him. They dragged the man to the far corner storage room and tried to push him inside. The snapping man jammed his foot against the door jamb and held his body stiff so the door could not close. The janitor with the broom looked over his shoulder at the room and asked for help that he did not get. He pulled harder. The other janitor lost his grip and fell. The snapping man turned and went for him on hands and knees. The janitor pulled himself backward with his heels and tried to bring the broom down. Most of the room froze. A man in a denim jacket moved first. He ran in and stomped the snapping man's ankle. Bone shifted. The snapping man did not cry out in a human way. He twisted and drove forward with both hands. He caught Denim Jacket's wrist and forearm and bit down through a sleeve. Denim Jacket kicked and yelled and jammed his knee into the snapping man's side. The janitor with the broom choked up on the handle and brought the butt down on the snapping man's neck. The man slumped for a second, and the janitor hit him again and again until the body stilled. The room stayed silent and watched. The denim jacket man held his forearm and stared at his sleeve. The young woman with the bandages was already moving his way with her kit open. She called him sir and asked him to sit with her. He did not sit. He backed away and said he was fine. He was not fine. Drops fell from his sleeve to the floor between his shoes. The staff person on the chair stared at the storage room where the man lay. She blinked 3 times fast and then asked the janitor to lock the storage room door anyway. He was dead, but she wanted the door locked. The janitor did it. The man with the denim jacket sat down before he fell down. The young woman pressed a bandage onto his arm. He watched the doors again. He was counting exits the same way I was. We made eye contact. He read my face and I read his. He knew what would happen to him. He also knew he would not be the one to say it out loud. Josh stood behind my knee and stared at the bandage, and then looked away because he understood enough. I brought Josh and Emma to the far end near the equipment closet where a rolled-up wrestling mat leaned. Kayla kept her eyes on the door and on Emma. Josh sat with his back against the mat and closed his eyes and counted under his breath again. He counted to 100 twice and then stopped counting and started to whisper a schedule for the next hour to himself. He said it just loud enough for him to hear. He said, "We sit here now, and then we eat a little bread, and then we drink a little water, and then we walk to the end of the bleachers, and then we look at the door, and then we come back." He made a plan. It calmed him. I told him he was doing good. The gym lights flicked and held. The speakers popped. The emergency message cut in, stuttered, and then reset. New words came. Curfew, martial law. Those words did not match what I saw. Martial law means people in charge. Here, a teacher on a chair was in charge. I looked up and saw a ceiling vent spinning slow and thought about air moving through ducts. The building had to have an outside intake. If the infected were outside, the vent pulled that air in. I stood and walked to the door that led to the locker rooms. It was propped open with a rubber wedge. I pulled the wedge and let the door close. People looked at me. I said the locker rooms had other exits and we needed them closed. The janitor nodded like he already knew and did not have enough hands. A sound came from the storage room door in the far corner. Light bumping at first, then a hard thump. A woman screamed and covered her mouth with both hands. Someone shouted to hold that door. The janitor who had hit the man with the broom ran toward it and fumbled with the lock. The lock held, and the door frame flexed from the inside. The young woman with the bandage kit stepped behind the bleacher row and put 3 kids behind her with her open arm. She stared at the door, and then at the bitten man on the floor, and then at the door again. She did not say it. None of us said it. We did not need the word. Josh looked at me, and I shook my head. He looked at Emma and took her hand again. The denim jacket man stood with effort and moved away from his spot. He walked along the wall and kept his injured arm pressed to his chest. He reached the equipment closet and tried the handle. Locked. He did not want a weapon. He wanted distance. He looked at me again, and then at the exit on our side. He shook his head a fraction of an inch at the exit like he was voting against it. I scanned the room and saw the things that would fail first. The storage room lock, the man with the bite, the door to the lobby. The staff person's voice broke when she told everyone to remain calm. That meant her next command would break, and the room would not hear it. The storage room door flexed again. The metal plate around the handle bent outward. This time, the thump was not one body. It sounded heavier. The janitor picked up the broom and set his feet to one side of the door, as if he would swing the door open and strike in one motion. The denim jacket man watched him, and then watched the exit on my side again, and shook his head at it. I decided. We were not staying. The staff person shouted to sit down and wait. I did not wait. I told Kayla to lift Emma and hold her. She did. I told Josh to stay on my left hip and not to let go of my jacket. He nodded. We moved down the bleacher steps to the far exit door. The exit had a panic bar. It would set off an alarm if the battery still had charge. I tested the push with my palm. It felt stiff but not locked. I waited for the storage room door to thump again. It did. On that noise, I pushed the bar, and we stepped into the hallway. The alarm made a tired sound, then cut out. The hallway smelled of mop water and paper towels. The floor rested under a line of recessed lights. Some were out. We moved to the right toward the custodian exit near the dumpsters. Emma held her breath and then let it out in measured puffs. Josh counted, low and steady. Kayla kept her light pointed down. As we passed the trophy case, the glass rattled at head height, and the sound came from the lobby. The main doors had given. A voice shouted and another voice shouted on top of it, and then the voices turned into noise. I heard bodies hit the bleachers. I pictured the wrestling mat, then forced my mind to the next step. Get to the exit. Behind the double doors to the cafeteria, something fell. I did not look. I kept my kids close and moved. The custodian exit was straight ahead, a steel door with push bar and small square window. I pointed the flashlight at the window. Dark outside. No movement in the cone of light. I put my ear to the door. The air beyond sounded big and open. I pushed. The door stuck. I put more shoulder into it. The rubber sweep at the bottom had caught on a bolt. I pulled back, raised the rubber with the toe of my shoe, and shoved. The door gave, and the night air slid in. We stepped out. The dumpsters cast a wide shadow across the loading bay. A raccoon stirred under the nearest one and scurried out and away. From inside the gym wing, screams took on a rhythm that did not include words anymore. I closed the steel door and slid the bolt. It would not stop much, but it would give whoever followed us one more second to think. Josh's hand fell from my jacket and I turned fast, but he had only stepped to the side to avoid a puddle. I tugged him back into line and told him to keep a hand on me. He said sorry. I told him he was good. Kayla leaned against the wall with Emma on her hip and worked to get her breath even. Emma's face had salt tracks. She nodded when I looked, as if to say she still understood the plan. We crossed the loading bay and slipped between two parked buses. The yard gate was open. Someone had cut the chain and left it on the asphalt. That was a good sign for us and a bad sign for the people inside. It meant the infected had a clear path in. It meant we had a clear path out. I led the kids through the gate and into the parking lot behind the auto parts store. The store's lights were dead. The glass had a star crack near the handle where someone had hit it. I did not need oil filters. I needed space and a route that put us away from thick clusters of people. The neighborhoods past the auto parts store had older houses and deeper yards. Easier to move quiet there. We passed a man in a superhero suit sitting in the middle of a side street. He held a pillowcase full of candy and rocked on his hips. I told Josh and Emma to look at the ground and keep moving. Kayla glanced once and kept her eyes forward after that. A group of teenagers jogged past us in the other direction with plastic swords and wands in their hands. One of them shouted that the school was open. I did not correct him. He would see it for himself before long. A dog barked from a porch and then ran down the steps out into the street. It stopped near the superhero man and sniffed the air, and then ran back to the porch with its tail down. On Maple Street, we came to a house with a raised porch and a floodlight that worked. 3 adults stood in the yard with bats and a crowbar. They had set up a low barricade with patio furniture and a table. One of them asked for passwords as if we had joined a club. No one had passwords. Another said we could come through if we left our bags. I said we would go around. The third person pointed the crowbar at us and told us to stop. I kept walking. The crowbar person jogged toward us. He reached for Josh's backpack strap. I stepped between him and Josh and pushed his hand away. He made a quick move to raise the bar and found the end of my revolver in his face before he was halfway there. He stopped. His eyes lost that hungry light and took a new one. Fear. He backed up. I told him to keep his neighbors safe and stop trying to play gatekeeper. He nodded. I lowered the revolver and we moved on. As we went, one of the other 2 cried. It sounded like a hospital hallway in the small hours. That sound had nothing to do with us. It belonged to something earlier in their night. We cut through a backyard with a treehouse. Emma pointed at it and asked if we could hide there. I told her that climbing was slow and loud and that we needed to keep our feet on the ground. She nodded and kept moving. A shed door hung open. Garden tools leaned inside. I took a wooden handle shovel and handed it to Josh. He held it with his hands wide on the shaft, unsure. I told him to keep it for balance and to drop it if I said drop. If he needed to swing it, swing at knees, not heads. He nodded, jaw tight. We reached the old duplexes near Carter Street. I had a friend there, Mark, with a basement that he had turned into a storm shelter after a tornado season 10 years ago. He had a hobby of overdoing safety, the kind of guy who tests smoke alarms once a month and keeps a ladder under his bedroom window. He texted me at 5 o'clock to say the power was out on his block and he had candles and a hand-crank radio. No text since. I wanted his basement. I texted again. No delivery mark. I tried anyway. As we turned onto Carter, a crowd formed at the far end near the gas station. Voices rose. I did not want the gas station. I wanted a dark, quiet basement with a door that shut. We walked the other way. Lights glowed faint in one duplex. I checked numbers. Mark's unit was the 3rd entrance from the corner. The 2nd had a lawn chair on its porch and a small plant in a chipped pot. The 3rd had a broom propped against the railing. I climbed the steps and knocked. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I knocked louder and put my mouth by the jamb and said his name in a steady voice. No answer. I waited. A sound came from inside. Not footsteps. A scrape and then a thump. Then silence. Kayla pulled the kids down the steps without a word. I tried the handle again. I stepped back and set my foot against the door just above the handle and pressed. The wood frame gave a little, but the deadbolt held. I pressed again and felt the bolt settle my weight into the side of my foot. I let up. The scrape from inside came again. It moved from the door toward the back of the unit. I did not press again. I stepped off the porch and moved my family toward the alley. A woman appeared at the corner with a baby carrier strapped to her front. She held a hammer in her right hand. Her hair hung in strands around her face. She saw us and moved to intercept with a forward head posture I had seen more than once tonight. I raised my hand and told her we were moving past the alley and did not want to get close. She did not answer. I raised my voice and told her to stop. She did not. The baby in the carrier made a slow mew. It was not asleep. The mother raised the hammer. I put my family behind me and held the revolver low. The woman sped up on the last 3 steps. I did not have room to sidestep. I raised the revolver and shot once. The woman fell in a tangle and landed face down on the curb. The hammer skidded and hit a trash can and lay. The baby carrier did not move. The baby made no sound. I stared for 1 second. 1 second only. Then I pulled Josh and Emma on. Kayla had both hands to her mouth and walked backward for a few steps with her eyes on the carrier. She could not make a sound. She turned and followed. Emma held my hand in a hard grip and said nothing. Josh kept the shovel up and scanned with short turns of his head. At the alley, a garage door sat half open. A light glowed under it. I ducked and slid under and pulled Josh and Emma after me. Kayla slid under and paused, stuck on a rolled edge. I reached, grabbed her elbow, and pulled. She cleared it. Inside, a mechanic's shop smelled of oil and solvent. A radio on a shelf played a talk show host from another state who had not caught up to what this was. He spoke about bad oysters at a festival, and then a caller tried to say something about the west side of a city, and then the signal cut. The garage had a man in it. He lay next to the open hood of a sedan. His hand hung down, and his fingers brushed the floor. A slow drop fell from his palm and made a dark circle on concrete. He did not move. The door to the office stood open. A roll of paper towels sat on the desk. I tore off 3 towels and handed one to Kayla. I told the kids not to touch anything. The back wall had a steel door with a small wired glass window. I looked through. It led to a narrow walkway behind a row of storage units. Those units pointed to the creek and then to a wooded strip. That strip led to an apartment building with a locked lobby. I had a buddy there on the 3rd floor. He was not Mark. He was Nate, a guy from a job whose daughter had sold lemonade one summer and roped Josh and Emma into sitting with her for an afternoon. He had 2 locks and a peephole and a habit of checking on neighbors. If he was home, he would let us in. If not, the building still had locks and floors and a roof. Better than a street. I opened the steel door and we moved into the walkway. It was tight and smelled of damp paper. One end had a floodlight that buzzed and flicked. The other opened to shadow. We went for the shadow. Footsteps from the front of the shop paused. A shape bent and looked under the garage door. The shape did not shout or call out. It pushed its face against the concrete and pressed into the view. It tried to fit. I shut the steel door behind us and turned the handle. No lock. I pulled a storage unit hasp and fed it through the handle to jam it. It might buy us 1 minute. Emma whispered that she could still hear the radio in the shop. I told her to focus on my hand. The wooded strip between the storage units and the apartments had litter on the ground that grabbed ankles. We moved slow. Dry leaves rubbed together. A cat ran out of a bush and Josh jumped. He did not speak. He put his hand back on my jacket. Past the trees, the apartment building lot sprawled empty. A bicycle lay on its side near the bike rack with the front wheel moving in tiny motions. A bottle of water had spilled next to it and spread a wet patch that drew a line toward the drain. The lobby had 2 sets of double doors. I set my kids behind a trash enclosure while I tested. Locked. No one behind the glass. A second set of doors on the side led to the mailroom. The mailroom door had a keypad. No use. A man stepped out from the stairwell door and stared past me at the parking lot. He held a kitchen knife. His eyes focused and then jumped to my face. He flinched like I had woken him. He asked if I had seen his wife. I said no. I asked if he knew Nate on the 3rd floor. He said Nate lived in 306 and then looked at Josh and Emma and put the knife down to his side so they would not see the blade. That read as a good sign. He said he would buzz us in. He moved to the mailroom panel and pressed a code. The door clicked. He He stepped aside and waved us in. I told Kayla to go. She went. The man followed us in and locked the door behind us. He said we could shelter in the stairwell if we needed. His hand shook on the knife handle. He hid it with a turn of his wrist. We climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The stairwell had the warm, old building smell of dust and damp carpet. On the 2nd landing, a small brown smear trailed on the wall at waist height. The 3rd floor hall had pictures of fruit in frames, the kind that came with the building. A smoke detector chirped its low battery call. It made the hall feel empty and lived in at the same time. We reached 306 and I knocked. No answer. I knocked again and said Nate's name. Footsteps. Nate's eye came to the peephole. Then the chain came off and the bolt slid and the door opened 6 inches. He saw me, then Josh and Emma, then Kayla. He moved quick and pulled us in and shut the door and slid the bolt with 2 hands. Nate looked older than the last time I saw him. He wore a flannel and sweatpants and socks. No shoes. His daughter slept on the couch under a blanket with a cartoon cat. The television flicked between emergency slides. Nate gestured toward the windows. He had the curtains closed and a couch pushed in front of one. He handed me a glass of water, and I did not know until I held it that my hand was shaking. I set it down so I would not spill on his rug. He told me we could stay for the night. He said the building had a rooftop with a lock. He said the basement had a laundry room with metal doors. He told me not to trust the police channel on the scanner because it was stuck and repeated calls from an hour ago. He had already done the work I would have done if this had been my place. I brought Josh and Emma to the bathroom and sat them on the edge of the tub. I washed each of their hands from wrists to fingers and under nails and dried them. I told them to take sips of water, not gulps. I asked if anything hurt. Emma said her shoulder where the backpack strap had rubbed. I checked and rubbed the spot and made a note to adjust the strap. Josh said his legs felt tight. I told him to stretch his calves and showed him how to press his hands into the wall and lean. He did it. It helped. He said so in a quiet voice. Kayla stood in the kitchen doorway and held a coffee mug with both hands. She did not drink. She watched the hallway. I stepped over and said her name. She blinked and focused. I asked if she wanted to lie down in the back room for a few minutes. She shook her head. She said if she lay down she would see her husband's face. I nodded. I told her she could sit in the chair by the door and watch the peephole if that helped. She gave a small smile. She sat and started a slow rotation of her feet under the chair that never reached the floor. Moving without going anywhere, it kept her steady. Nate made peanut butter sandwiches and handed halves around. I forced myself to chew. Josh ate his half and looked at the second half and then pushed it away. Emma nibbled small bites. Nate's daughter slept through it all. He said she had not slept all day and finally dropped. He touched her hair once and then pulled his hand back. He stood and checked the lock again. He put a chair under the knob. It would not stop anyone strong, but it would buy a second. I set the revolver on the counter and loaded the last 3 rounds from my pocket. 3 left in the box. I closed the box and slid it under the couch frame. We waited. There were quiet cries from outside the building and a single scream far off that clipped at the end as if a hand had covered a mouth. A crash at the far end of the hall. A door slammed. Feet ran past and went down the stairs. The smoke detector chirped again, and then again. It did not die. It kept insisting on a problem that had nothing to do with the real problem. Josh sat with his back to the couch and rolled the shovel handle in his palms. Emma lay with her eyes open on the pillow and stared at my face to see if I looked calm. I kept my face steady. I let the kids have the bedroom. I pushed the dresser against the door and left the window locked and the blinds lowered. I showed them the flashlight and told them how to click it on and off fast if they needed me and did not want to yell. I tucked Emma's blanket around her legs and then around Josh's. He looked at me and tried to pretend he was not looking at me to see if I would look back. I looked back. I did not push a smile. He did not need a lie. He needed to know I would hear him if he needed me. I shut the door and stayed in the hall for 1 minute listening to their breathing. I needed that sound of my kids at rest. In the living room, Nate and I sat at the window couch and talked in low voices. Not gossip, Data. He told me what he had seen on the street as the sun went down. A boy in a football jersey staggering down the middle of the road, mouth moving but no sound. 3 cars crashed near the light with drivers staring dead ahead and hands still on the wheel. One woman ran into the street to pull her friend back and got knocked down by a kid on a scooter who had not looked up. The kid stood, left the scooter, and walked away. Not infected, just lost. Nate said he had watched a man break into the laundromat across the street, steal quarters, and then sit on the floor and stack them and knock them down. He said the infection spread fast and quiet. He stopped and said he did not want to use comparisons. I told him I knew. He nodded and kept scanning the hall. He asked what I had seen. I told him about the porch, about Kayla's husband, about the school. He looked sick and then steady. He said we would take turns. One slept while the other watched the hall and the window. He said the rooftop had a heavy door, and that might be our last stand if the building flooded with people or worse. I asked if he had anything that could back up the revolver. He had a wooden bat cut down to a shorter length and a small hatchet for camping. He set them on the coffee table and sat back with his knees apart and his hands on his thighs, as if he was about to stand again, but did not. Kayla kept her eyes on the peephole and said nothing. Kayla did not move from the chair at the door. She would not sleep. Her focus had found something to hold. I did not take it away. I took first watch at the window. Nate took the hallway. An hour passed. Maybe 2. The city outside dimmed to pockets. A car burned in the distance beyond buildings. You could see the light shift on the low clouds. I watched and listened. I let the words I did not want to say stay in my head. Infection. Reanimation. Those are words from movies. Tonight those words were the shape of the street. After midnight, a building across the lot had movement behind a window on the 2nd floor. A woman stood pressed against the glass. Her face was blank. She lifted one hand and tapped the window in a steady rhythm. Her eyes did not track. No curtains moved behind her. A man walked into the room behind her and faced the window. He did the same. They tapped together. The sound did not reach us. The picture of it did. Nate saw it and went still in the doorway. He had been moving his head back and forth, scanning the hall. He stopped and stared. Kayla kept her eyes on the peephole. I told them to look away from the window. I told them to look at the floor, and then take 6 breaths, and then look at each other. They did it. That simple task cleared the image a little. We took turns sleeping. Sleep is not the right word. I shut my eyes for 20 minutes and counted 10 breaths and then opened them again and checked on Josh and Emma. Emma slept with one fist on her cat ring. Josh slept with one hand hooked through his backpack strap. That detail hit me. He was making sure no one could lift it off him while he slept. I adjusted the strap so it would not choke him and held his wrist for 1 second, just long enough to feel him reel under my hand, then let go. Close to 2 o'clock, the hallway door down the way opened and closed. A soft click. Bare feet on carpet. A child walked past the door to 306 with slow steps. A girl in pajamas. She reached out and touched each door as she passed, and whispered a name each time. I could not hear the name. She reached the end of the hall, and turned and touched each door on the way back. She stopped in front of ours, and touched the door, and whispered again. Kayla held her breath and leaned forward. I shook my head. The girl moved on. I do not know if she was sleepwalking or in shock or infected. I did not open the door to find out. By 3 o'clock, the city outside had settled into a new pattern. No sirens now, just single cars running stop signs and then stopping in the middle of intersections as if the driver had lost the thread. A man jogged down the sidewalk past the apartment as if training, and then stopped and looked up at the sky and then jogged again. He had no shirt and there was a smear across his chest that might have been blood or paint or something from the road. He ran until he turned a corner. More infected wandered in pairs and small clusters. Some moved in fits and starts. Some stood still, and then moved fast for 10 steps and then stood still again. Their motion set my nerves on edge in a steady straight line. I arranged my next steps in my head and held to those. I opened the curtain an inch and watched the street that curved up the hill. A slow line of shapes kept appearing at the top of the rise. Some still wore holiday costumes. I saw a witch hat, a cardboard robot box hanging by one taped strap, a sheet ghost with one torn eye hole. They came in waves, not in lines. The neighborhood did not push them, they just kept coming, hour after hour. I counted 20 on the hill at once, then 30, then a gap, then another 20. I stopped counting and closed the curtain. Near 4 o'clock, Emma woke and asked for me. I went into the room and sat on the bed and put my hand on her hair. She asked if the man from next door was going to be okay. She meant Kayla's husband. I told her no. She put the cat ring on my finger and told me to keep it for 1 hour and then give it back. I told her I would. She curled under the blanket and slept again, with a quick, shallow breath that smoothed out after a minute. I sat on the floor by the door for 5 breaths and then stood. Kayla had slid down in her chair and slept with her head against the door. Nate sat against the kitchen cabinets with the hatchet across his knees. He had not slept. He stared at the locked door as if he had to hold it closed with his eyes. I told him to stand up and stretch while I took that watch. He did. His knees cracked. He moved around the small kitchen doing slow, quiet tasks. He stacked 3 cups and unstacked them and faced them the same direction in the cabinet. He straightened the chairs. He kept his hands busy. When dawn came, it did not feel like a new day. It felt like a pause. The street showed what the night had done. Trash cans in the middle of the road. A ladder in a driveway with no obvious use. 2 police cruisers parked on the sidewalk. One had a door open. No one in sight. I saw a man on a balcony across the lot with a kitchen knife held down to his side, the same way the stairwell man had held his knife. He watched the lot for a full minute and then nodded to himself and went back inside. I brewed coffee on Nate's stovetop with his kettle and a pour-over filter. The smell tried to pull me into an old morning. I pushed that away. Nostalgia blows holes in defense. I handed coffee to Kayla and to Nate. We sipped and watched and made plans. The plan was simple. We would stay put through morning. If emergency broadcasts came with real instructions, we would follow them. If not, we would work on making the building safer. Rooftop access, side stairwell locked. If more people came to the door, we would judge each case. No bites allowed. No exceptions. Harsh rules keep children alive. I did not say that part out loud in those words. I did not need to. Nate understood. Kayla understood. I checked on Josh and Emma one more time. Josh sat at the window and traced a map in a notebook he had pulled from his bag. He had drawn our house, the alley, the bike trail, the school, and the apartment. He connected them with arrows. He had labeled each arrow with words that made sense to him. Left behind. Too loud. Doors locked. Emma slept with the blanket over her head. Her feet stuck out. Her socks had small pumpkins on them. I tucked the socks under the blanket and stood still until I was sure my face was steady again. Nate stepped into the hall and checked both directions. No movement. No voices. No doors ajar. He came back and nodded once. It meant we had a small pocket of time. I used it. I went through the kitchen and opened the cabinets with fast hands. I was not hunting for comfort. I was counting calories and water, crackers, canned beans, dried pasta, 2 packs of instant rice, a bag of flour. I stacked it on the counter. I checked under the sink, cleaners and trash bags. I took 5 bags and rolled them tight. I put 3 in my backpack and kept 2 on the counter. I checked the fridge. Milk, leftover soup, half a rotisserie chicken in a plastic tub. I closed it again. Smell carries through a building fast. Kayla stood and stretched her legs. Her face had the blank look of someone whose thoughts had run in a circle all night and had finally burned out. She looked at me, and then at the locked door, and then at the kids' bedroom. She weighed the same scale I was weighing. Stay or run. The hall went quiet, and then the quiet broke. A knock hit a door 3 units down, and a voice called a name. The voice had that edge from a long night on an emergency line, close to pleading. The same voice turned into a shout. A second voice answered. 2 more doors opened. The sound rose and sharpened and cut. Someone said a mother's name. That word tore at the air in a way that made my hand go to the revolver without thought. Nate froze and listened with his head tilted, locating doors the way a person locates thunder. Then a new sound. The stairwell door at the end slammed open hard enough to shake the frame. Feet hit carpet, many feet, at a pace that was wrong for a stairwell. The sound came toward us fast and then stopped one apartment away. A man shouted for a key. Another man said he had it. Keys rattled in a fist. The lock clicked and failed. The key did not fit. The first man shouted the name again. A woman screamed from inside that unit. It was short and clean, and then cut off. Silence fell for 3 beats, and then the hallway exploded. Hands hit doors. A body slammed a jam. Someone pounded on 308 and shouted to let him in. No one answered. I moved. I lifted my kid's bedroom door a half-inch and looked in. Both were awake, eyes bright in the dark. I told them in a whisper it was time. Backpacks on, shoes tied. Emma slid off the bed in one smooth motion. Josh stood and already had the strap over his shoulder. I handed him the shovel. I put the cat ring back in Emma's palm and closed her fingers around it. She nodded twice and put it in her pocket. Nate handed me the hatchet. He took the cut-down bat. He pulled the chair from under the doorknob and put it back where it would not trip anyone. Kayla moved to the peephole and looked out once. She shut her eyes and leaned her head against the door and then opened her eyes again. Her jaw set. She nodded to me. I nodded back. We listened once more. The pounding had moved down the hall and then stopped. A dry scrape answered from carpet. The smell reached us through the gap under the door, the sour, metallic air that hangs after a struggle. I put my hand on the bolt and counted to 3 in my head. I slid the bolt and turned the deadbolt and opened the door 6 inches. The hall had bodies in it. Some stood, some crawled. Some pressed faces to the baseboards and sniffed the line where carpet met wall. An older man in a robe stood with his hand braced on a door frame and his head hanging as if his neck had forgotten how to hold it up. The skin at the edge of his robe showed fresh scratches in lines where nails had raked. He lifted his face a fraction of an inch and stared at the wall. Not us. The stairwell door at the end had caved inward. A hinge hung by one screw. The hall lights were on timers, and half of them went dead, and then came back, and then dead again. I cut those patterns out of my head and set my steps. We went left, away from the cluster. Josh kept his fingers on my jacket hem, not just the fabric but the seam, so he could grip something solid. Emma took Kayla's hand. Nate walked backward with the bat raised. He checked our rear. Slow steps. No talking. At the end, we reached the maintenance door for roof access. It had a keypad and a cylinder lock. The keypad light was dead. The lock held. I pulled the hatchet and checked the strike plate. 2 screws. Short screws. Good sign. I set the edge and pried. The screw head stripped. I set the back of the hatchet under the lip and levered hard. The plate bent. The bolt stayed. Nate moved next to me and set the bat point into the gap I had made. He leaned his weight. The plate creaked and bent. I pulled again with the hatchet. The bolt slipped a fraction. I threw my shoulder into the door near the latch. The frame cracked. The bolt slid and the door opened 2 inches. Behind us, the older man in the robe turned his head at the sound. He stepped our way and then stopped. He tilted his face and sniffed the air. His eyes did not see us. His ears found us. He started forward. The robe dragged. A smear followed the hem. I went at the door again. Nate jammed the bat into the gap and torqued it hard. The bolt bent and popped. The door flew open and hit the stopper. We slid through and pulled it shut. No lock from this side. I wrapped a trash bag through the push bar and tied it to the railing in a tight knot. It would hold long enough to move. The stair up to the roof ran in a tight square. Concrete walls, metal steps. It smelled dry and hot even in the cool morning. We climbed one flight and hit the roof door. Another push bar. I elbowed it and the door swung out into cold air. The roof was flat with gravel and tar lines. A low parapet ran the edge. 2 vents spun slow on their caps. A black cable sagged between our building and the next. The cable drooped to arm height. It would not hold a person's weight. From up there, I saw the neighborhood in one view. Smoke in 4 places. The school roof had holes where heat had blown up from the gym. The football field had cars on it. Not parked. Resting at angles where panic had put them. A bus sat sideways across the access road. A line of people moved along the baseball diamond fence, and I could not tell if they were alive or not. The sound carried flat across the roofs. Nate pointed at the next building over. It was 1 story lower. A narrow gap lay between roofs. 4 feet, maybe more. The parapets on both sides were chipped. Someone had jumped it before. The landing area on the far side had scuffs. That gap led to a row of shops with a stair down to a private courtyard. From there, an alley led to a church with a brick bell tower. The church sat on a hill with a view of the river. On the far side of that river, the subdivision ran to the edge of the woods. Fewer people, more space. I traced the path and set it behind my eyes so I would not have to think about it again. I brought Josh and Emma to the parapet and showed them the gap. I did not lie. I told them it was scary and it was the path. I said we would go one at a time and I would not change my mind mid-jump. Josh looked at the space and then looked at me and nodded once. Emma grabbed my shirt near my belt and held on. I told her I would go first. She asked to go on my back. I told her no. I told her I needed my arms. She nodded and set her jaw. I stepped back, set my toes, picked a spot on the far roof, and ran 3 steps and pushed. The far side met me at the shin. I threw my hands down and caught the cap of the parapet and pulled my weight over. I landed on my hip. Gravel bit my palm. I stood and checked my feet and knees and waved to the kids. Josh backed up, ran, cleared it with room, and rolled out of momentum on the roof. He looked stunned, and then ready again. He handed me the shovel. Emma stood with her fists clenched on the edge and stared at the gap. I told her to look at my face, not at the space. Kayla crouched and tied Emma's backpack straps tighter and said her name in a steady voice, 1 beat apart. Emma ran and jumped. She hit the parapet with both hands and clung. I grabbed her wrists and pulled. Her feet kicked once. I lifted her over and set her down, and she made a sound I had never heard from her, and then pressed her forehead to my stomach for 1 second. Then she pulled back and nodded hard. She was with me. Kayla stood at the edge and stared. Her legs shook. She blew air out and set her shoulders and ran. She cleared it. She landed on her knees and palms, and then sat back and let out 1 short laugh with no humor under it. Nate went last. He made it clean and light on his feet for a thick man. We were across. A body hit the roof hatch behind us and rattled the metal. The door shook. The trash bag not held. For now. We moved fast across the second roof to the stairwell cube and down a half flight. The door to the shop below was chained. A paper with the word closed sat under the chain. The glass had a crack that ran from corner to corner. We backed up to the parapet and looked down into the courtyard. It had a fountain with no water and 3 potted trees in long boxes. No movement. We dropped down the exterior ladder to the courtyard. My hands burned where the metal pulled skin. The gate to the alley had a latch on our side. I opened it. The alley was empty for 100 feet. Past that, the mouth opened on the church parking lot. 2 bodies stood near the steps. 1 swayed. The other stood still. A third shape crawled under a car and did not come out. We moved low. We kept the buildings tight to our right shoulder. The parking lot was a mess. Cars sat at angles. The church doors stood closed. A hand-printed sign hung by 1 nail. Shelter full. Try school. Someone had crossed out school in thick black marker. Past the lot, the hill climbed to the bell tower. The tower door had a padlock. The lock looked old, but the hasp was fresh steel. A recent fix. A smart fix. I checked the wood around the hasp. Soft. Old door. I set the hatchet under the hasp plate and pried. The screws resisted. I pulled harder. The wood fiber tore. The top screw popped and the plate bent. I drove the hatchet under the bottom screw and popped it. The lock swung free. I opened the door, and we filed into the stairwell. The air inside was cool. It smelled like stone dust and rope. We climbed. The stairs were narrow and wound tight around the core. The steps had dips from a century of shoes. Halfway up, we passed a window slit, and I looked out. The river cut a dark line across the map of the city. The bridge for cars stood full of stalled vehicles. The rail bridge sat beyond it. The rail bed was empty. The far side of the river had fewer rooftops and more trees. The choice set itself. At the top, we found the bell, and the wooden frame around it. The bell had a rope tied off. I did not touch it. Any sound was a flare. The platform had room for a few people and a view. I raised my eyes and saw movement under the bridge. 3 boats drifted together with no one guiding them, bumping and separating and bumping again. Debris hung from the bridge railing. No guards, no blockades. The city had not had time for the steps that take meetings. We sat for 3 minutes. I set a timer on my phone so I would not start to like the feeling of being off the ground. 3 minutes. Then we stood. I showed Josh and Emma the route again with my finger. Down to the back gate, across the lot, cut through the block of small houses to the river path. Follow it under the bridge to the rail line. Up the gravel to the bridge deck. Cross single file with hands on the rail. Do not look down through the ties. Keep eyes on the far side. If someone falls, I said, I will not jump after. I said it plain. There was no space for lies that would kill 3 to save 1. Kayla listened and nodded. She looked at the river and then at her hands. She had lost her wedding ring in the night. She noticed and fought the urge to go back to the last place she might have had it. She pulled her fingers into a fist and let it go, and pulled them in again, and stopped. She was here, not back there. We came down the tower and stepped into the parking lot again. 2 infected on the far side sensed us. They started moving, one fast, one slow. The fast one wore a holiday mask over the top half of his face and a leather jacket. His mouth and chin were bare, dry, cracked. The slow one was a woman in jeans with one knee torn. She moved poorly at the hip. We did not engage. We moved at a steady pace toward the back gate. The fast one adjusted and tried to cut us off. He would miss it by 2 car widths if we kept our line firm. He lunged anyway. He hit the trunk of a sedan and rolled over it and hit the asphalt with his shoulder and got up and came again. He wasted his body for 3 feet of ground. That is what we were up against. I kept my pace. He missed our line and hit the gate 3 steps behind Josh's backpack. I turned and raised the revolver as a reflex. The shot would bring others in. I did not fire. Nate stepped in and drove the bat down on the fast one's wrist. Bone cracked. The hand flopped. The man still came. Nate hit him once more on the temple. The man went down and did not rise. The slow one trailed. We left her behind. We ran the small street behind the church and passed 3 porches with pumpkins on the steps. One was tipped and had been stepped on. Seed smeared across the board. Emma saw it and put her hand on her pocket. The cat ring was still there. She checked and looked forward again. Good habit. Check, then stop checking. At the river path, the wind was colder. The path had a metal rail and a line of hedges. A man crouched behind a bench with a kitchen knife and a pillowcase bag at his feet. He did not move when we passed. His eyes were open and filmed. He was not infected. He was empty. He watched the water and did not see us. I did not try to pull him out. We had no rope to pull with. We reached the rail bed. The gravel shifted under our shoes. The grade up to the bridge made Josh's steps shorter. I did not let anyone stop. Stopping on an incline is a trap. Stop at the top, where you can choose a direction. We reached the bridge deck. The ties had gaps. The river showed through. The handrail on our right was steel and cold. I put my left hand on the top rail and my right on Emma's shoulder blade. Josh put his hand on my belt loop and kept the shovel in his other hand. Kayla took the rail with both hands and moved in small steps. We crossed, foot by foot. The city moved around us but did not touch us. A siren at one end of town tried to speak and then died. A helicopter hung low near the hospital and then pulled away. A child on a balcony on the far side of the river watched us and then went inside. Halfway, Emma paused when her shoe hit a gap and her toe slipped. She did not cry out. She set her foot and breathed and moved on. Josh repeated the count, and I matched his pace. 3/4 across, a man stepped onto the bridge from the far side. He wore a suit with the tie gone and the shirt open at the collar. His hair stood in old gel spikes and had powder on it from drywall. He held a crowbar in his right hand. He saw us and started across fast. He did not look down. He moved with purpose. Not infected, mouth firm, eyes hard. He raised the crowbar and shouted for us to stop and give him the gun. He had judged the world and picked a lane. I judged him. He would not stand down. He would want the bags, and the knife and the bat, and the little boy's shovel, and we would die on the bridge while he counted new belongings. I set Emma behind me with one hand and took 2 steps forward with the revolver at my hip. I did not aim at his chest. A miss would go into the condos below. I aimed at the steel of the bridge near his right shin. I fired once. The sound hit the river and came back. The round sparked and he flinched and lost his pace. He stumbled. His eyes went wide. He stepped back and his heel hit an edge and he threw out his arms. He did not fall. He caught himself with the crowbar on a tie and pulled his weight back. He stared at me with hate and something else. He lowered the crowbar and pinned himself against the rail and slid past us with his eyes on the bolts. He whispered to the steel. We moved past him and did not turn. On the far side, the track met ground. We stepped off the bridge. Everyone's legs went soft for a second at the feel of dirt underfoot. The relief tried to bloom into a pause. I did not let it. I turned us into the trees and off the right of way. 10 minutes more. Then we could rest. We cut through back lots and reached a cul-de-sac. Newer houses, bigger yards, fewer decorations. The first porch had a camera on it. The little blue ring glowed. It meant the house had power. It meant the owner had put money into security. I did not want that house. The second had lawn chairs stacked under a tarp. The third had a basement door on the side with 2 deadbolts. I tried the handle. Locked. I checked the window next to it. Wooden sash. Old paint. I wedged the hatchet in and pried the lock loose. The window slid up with a scrape. I checked the sill for broken glass. Clean. I sent Josh through first to clear any table or chair. He dropped into a laundry room and whispered that it was clear. Emma went next. I lowered her by her armpits and set her down. Kayla went. Nate went. I went last. The basement smelled of detergent and dust. A water heater clicked. A dehumidifier sat with the light off. We moved upstairs slow. I kept the revolver ahead of me and the hatchet in my other hand. The kitchen had mail on the counter and a bowl with apples. A calendar on the wall was still on last month. The table had one place set and a mug with a spoon in it. No one home. Good. We checked each room. No people. No pets. No fresh blood. We closed blinds and curtains and set the sofa against the front door and a chair under the back. We drank water and sat for 5 minutes. I looked through drawers. I found a flashlight and new batteries. I found a first aid kit. I found a set of car keys and wrote the makedown in case it helped later. I found a photo of a family at the beach. I turned it face down and slid it under the stack of mail. I did not need that picture in my head. We made a list on a legal pad. Water, food, heating that did not need power, tools, a map, fuel, shoes for Emma that were not worn flat. The list helped. It turned the shape of the day into tasks. Tasks turn fear into motion. That is not a fancy line. It is a fact. Josh read the list and nodded at the parts he could do. He sorted batteries by size without being asked. Emma put the water bottles in a neat row. Kayla went quiet again at the table with the mug. She had begun to come back to herself, and now the weight pressed down again. She asked me if we could go back for her husband's body. She did not say the word body. She did not need to. I told her we could not. I told her I would not risk the kids for a grave. I said it flat. She stared at me with anger that wanted a target, and then she let it go. She nodded once. I do not know if she forgave me for the sentence. The sentence was true. We sat in a small circle in the living room and went over the plan again. We would not stay in the cul-de-sac longer than the day. The suburbs give a false sense of space. At night, the dead move through quiet. Fences and hedges mean nothing. We would move again at dusk or full dark depending on noise, wind and sightlines. We would head east to the smaller highway that ran away from the city, then south to my mother's place if the bridge over the creek held. That house had bars on the basement windows. If she was alive, she would meet us at the door with a short laugh and a hard hug, and a list of chores. If she was dead, The house was still a strong box. Nate said he would come as far as the highway and then decide. He wanted to stop at a duplex near the turnpike for his sister. He had not heard from her since last night. He said her name and stared at the floor, and then looked up and squared his shoulders. He would go to that door. He would not ask my opinion on it. He did not need to. He knew what I would say. I took Josh to the kitchen and adjusted his backpack straps and checked his shoes again. I retied them tight. I showed him how to hook the shovel over his shoulder so his hands would be free. He asked me if he had to hit a person with it. I told him I hoped not, and that if he had to, he swung at knees, not heads. Legs end pursuits. I hate that sentence. I taught it anyway. Emma wanted to help. She asked what she could do besides be quiet. I told her she could watch corners when we walked and count steps between streetlights so she would know how far to run if I told her to run to the next light. She liked that. She repeated the numbers under her breath with her hand in her pocket around the cat ring. She was building walls in her mind that would hold. Midday passed without sound from the road out front. I lifted the blinds an inch and watched the shadow slide across the neighbor's car. No people. A dog trotted into the yard, sniffed at the porch, and trotted away. A drone buzzed overhead and drifted off. Someone somewhere still had a charged phone and time to waste. I used the rest of the day to fortify small things we could leave in place for whoever came after. I filled the bathtub with water. I filled every bottle we could find. I put a note on the fridge with the emergency band frequency that had spoken in the night and the times it had broadcast. I wrote the school has fallen and crossed out school. I wrote middle school gym unsafe and underlined unsafe. I wrote rail bridge open at sunrise with a question mark and then crossed the question mark. The path would not hold forever, but it would hold for the next few hours. Someone else could use that window. We rested in shifts. I knew our bodies would betray us if we did not take what rest we could. I slept in a chair for 20 minutes with the revolver on my lap. I woke to Josh counting under his breath while staring at the wall. He had not slept. He could not make his head allow it. I told him it was all right and that he could sleep next. He did, for 10 minutes. Head tipped forward, mouth open. He snored once, and then woke and looked embarrassed. I told him the sound meant his throat worked, and he laughed once and covered his mouth with his hand. Emma drew boxes on the legal pad and filled them with X marks. She told me each box was a block, and the X marks were closed doors. As the sun lowered, I did one more sweep of the house. In the garage, I found a box of nails, a coil of rope, and a folding camp stove with 2 fuel cans. I took the stove and 1 can and left the other for the next person. We packed light. The rule was simple. If it did not help you live through the next 12 hours, it did not go in the bag. We were ready to leave when a sound came from the back of the house. Not a crash, a careful rattle. Someone had found the basement window we had used. The sash scraped an inch. A voice said hello in a thin tone that did not offer a name. Kayla looked at me. Nate raised the bat. I set my finger on the trigger guard. The sash moved again. The thin voice asked again if anyone was inside. I went to the top of the basement steps and stood where the stairs hid my body. I told the voice to stop and name himself. The voice said he was a neighbor who had seen us come in and asked for water. He begged for 1 bottle. I did not hear anyone else breathing down there. Just him. I grabbed 1 bottle and slid it down the stairs and set it on the floor halfway. I told him to come up 2 steps only and to take it and to not try the window again. I held the revolver where he could not miss it. He climbed 2 steps. He was a teenager with dirt on his face and wide eyes. He took the bottle and said thank you 3 times. He did not try a trick. He went back down and out the window. He ran off across the yard and did not look back. I stood there another minute and listened. No one else moved. Not every decision ends in a knife. Some end in a kid drinking water behind a hedge. We left at full dark when the streetlights clicked on. The air had a chill that kept smell down. That helped. We moved through the yards and out the side street to the feeder road. The main highway to the south had a glow. Fire or halted cars with hazard lights on. Hard to tell. We moved away from that. The city behind us had a low murmur that would not stop for months. We took a route I knew without street names. Left at the old stucco house with the white fence. Across the vacant lot where a house burned 2 summers ago. Behind the repair shop with the dog that sleeps through everything. Over the drainage ditch where Josh and Emma once caught tadpoles. That walked us to the small bridge over the creek. No cars, no people, only water under it and trees on both sides. On the far side, a truck blocked the road. 4 men stood near it with flashlights. One wore a sheriff's department jacket over a sweatshirt. The patch looked real. The man inside it did not. He held the flashlight on his shoulder, pointed down the barrel of his shotgun. He told us to stop and put our hands up. I told Josh to hold the shovel up in one hand and keep his palm open. I told Emma to raise both hands and keep her feet where they were. I lifted the revolver by 2 fingers and set it on the ground and stepped back. The man in the jacket told us to empty our bags. I told him we had kids and needed food. He said the same sentence again and tapped the muzzle on his thigh. He had a dead look in his eyes that said he had made himself judge of this span of asphalt and would not give it back. Nate stepped forward and told the man he used to volunteer for the food bank, and he knew how to make 10 cans feed 20 people. The man told him to be quiet. One of the others twitched his head at the woods and looked nervous. He was new to this. The jacket man lifted his shotgun to a half-ready position, and the metal made a small sound. I asked him if he had kids. He did not answer. I said I would open my bag and hand him half of what I carried if he let us walk. He stared at my face and then at Emma's cat ring as she shifted her hand. His mouth moved in a small way that I could not read. He nodded once. I opened my bag and set 2 cans and half a loaf and 1 bottle in a pile. He took them and looked at the bottle and looked up at me, and I kept my eyes on his and did not blink hard. He stepped back and lifted his chin toward the woods. Go. We went. I did not say thank you. He had set a toll. He could live with the weight of that choice. We had paid and moved on. That is what living looked like now. The last mile to my mother's house took us past familiar landmarks turned into problems. A swing set with 1 chain snapped that clanked in a rhythm that made Emma flinch every time until I put my hand on the chain and stopped it. A field where a tractor sat with the key in it and the door open. A mailbox with the door popped and a stack of wet flyers inside. The sky to the east had a thin line of light under the dark where the next day would arrive whether we wanted it or not. Josh told Emma the count to the corner from the bridge. She added 2 more for the hedges. It kept them both level. We reached the street that held my mother's house. The houses sat back from the road with deep porches. Yard lamps were off. A flag from a past holiday hung limp on one porch. I stopped at the corner and scanned the whole block with slow cuts of my eyes. No movement. I moved us up along the side hedges and into the driveway behind her car. The car had a dent on the rear bumper from last winter. The dent was still there. That small normal detail helped. I hung onto it and then let it go. I knocked on the side door with a pattern that I have used since I was 17. Short, long, short, long. No answer. I used the key. The door opened to the mudroom. It smelled like laundry soap and cold air. I stepped in and waited. The house talked in small ways. Ducts click, fridge hum, a floorboard settles. No footsteps. I moved through the kitchen and into the hall. Her bedroom door was open. Her bed was made. That stopped me. She never leaves a bed made if she has slept in it. She folds the covers down while the coffee brews. I went to the basement door and opened it. The lock was engaged from the inside with a steel bar. I tapped the wood with my knuckles 3 times. The bar lifted. The door opened a crack. My mother's face filled the space. She stared at my face, and at Josh and Emma behind me, and at Kayla and Nate, and then she said my name in a steady tone that cracked at the end. She pulled the door wide and waved us in, and shut it and set the bar back in the brackets with both hands. The basement was ready. Water jugs on a shelf, canned goods, a camping lantern, a radio on a crate with the antenna extended, blankets on the old couch. She had made a nest that would take us through a week if we were careful. She said she had turned off the breaker to the upstairs doorbell because people had hit it all night, and she had not answered. She said she had heard men on the street who were not police. She said she had her own bat near the stairs. She said all this while making Emma a cup of hot water with honey and Josh a plate with crackers. She did not need to tell me she had been scared. I could read the way the rug curled under the table because she had paced it. I put my head on her shoulder and stood like that for 3 seconds. Then I backed up and told her the short version of our night. She sat and put her elbows on her knees and clasped her hands and did not interrupt. When I finished, she asked what the plan was. I told her we would stay long enough to sleep and listen and eat, and then decide by noon if we were moving on. She nodded. She looked at Nate. He said his sister's name and that he wanted to check her place. My mother said she would go with him to the corner and watch the street while he went to the door. That is the kind of woman she is. We washed hands. We ate. We set places to sleep. Kayla sat on the bottom step with her hands on her knees and stared at nothing for a long minute, and then stood and rolled her shoulders and looked around the room with attention again. She asked what she could do. My mother handed her a list and pointed to the pantry. She moved and set out cans and stacked them by type and said the names out loud as she stacked. Beans, corn, soup. The simple act pulled her back into this room. Emma counted each stack and wrote the number on the legal pad. Josh checked the radio bands and marked the frequencies that still spoke. I lay down on the old couch with Emma curled against my chest and Josh on the floor within reach of my hand. He had the shovel across his knees. He was asleep before he knew it. His hand still rested on the handle. I did not sleep yet. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe. I counted the seconds between the radio's static bursts. I made small adjustments to the plan in my head. I made the decision where I keep decisions. We would rest and then send Nate and my mother for his sister. If she was alive, we would bring her down. If not, we would decide what to tell him and when to tell it. We would share what we had with limits that would keep the kids full enough to think. We would close the vents to the upstairs and draft the chimney to move air without a fan. We would break the steps if we had to, and sleep in shifts with the bolts set. We would not open the door for anyone who hid a bite. That sentence is rough, and it is the line we would keep. I would keep it for as long as Josh and Emma breathed. Dawn pressed at the window wells and made a low white glow on the basement floor. My mother sat on a milk crate with the bat across her knees. Nate sat next to the stairs tying and retying his shoe. Kayla folded a blanket at the corner and set it on a stack with edges straight. It kept her hands working. Emma's cat ring sat on the table next to an old deck of cards. Josh snored once, soft, then breathed quiet again. The revolver lay within my reach. It was not a symbol. It was a tool with a number attached to it. This is the part where a story would push hope into a line and try to make it carry weight. I will not do that. We were alive. We had water. We had food. We had a handful of tools. We had a plan that would last until noon. Past that was more work and more choices, and more ways to get it wrong. We would try not to. I stood and stretched my back. My mother looked up and met my eyes. She gave me that short laugh that sounds almost rude and means pride in her language. She said my name again, small, just for me, and nodded at the stairs. It meant we were still doing the next thing. We are alive, so we do the next thing. I picked up the revolver and the hatchet and put the cat ring in my pocket for 1 hour while Emma slept. On the street outside, more bodies came up the hill. Some in costumes, some barefoot, some with bags still in their hands. That will go on for a long time. I cannot stop it. I can count doors and ears and hands and water jugs. I can move children through rooms and across roofs and over bridges. I can say yes when it matters and no when it matters more. I sat back down, set the gun near my knee, and closed my eyes for 10 minutes. Then I opened them and started the day. That's all for now, survivor. Thanks for listening. If you want to keep these stories alive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. And a huge thank you to everyone supporting this channel with extra memberships, especially Carlos Herrera, Luca Mod, Jedala, The Great Anywho. Thanks. Also drop a comment and let me know what story you want to hear next. Jack's Nightmares signing off.